said, there's method to the madness. So we've gone from digestion to the second, which is the second brain, to the primary brain in the psychology of addiction. And now Jessica is going to introduce our next speaker.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. He is a new guest for us. And thank you so much for being with us. We have the Rebel MD, Dr. Christian Shaw, with us. And he's going to actually be speaking about about CBD research and the opioid crisis. But to give you a little background about this incredible man, he is board certified in public health and general preventative medicine. He has a specialty board certification in addiction medicine, as well as certification in integrative medicine with a PhD in neurological sciences. Okay, so he's actually a physician. He's a neuroscientist, and he specializes in the clinical practice of addiction, occupational and preventative medicine. His multinational medical and scientific training has provided him exposure to health systems around the world, including Canada, England, and South Africa. So again, his credentials: he's certified by the American Board of Preventative Medicine in public health and general preventative medicine, and his subspecialty board certification is addiction medicine. He's also the consulting medical director for drug and alcohol treatment centers in Arizona, New Mexico, and Indiana. He's also a corporate physician consultant within the energy industry. Okay, so as if that isn't enough, during his specialty training, he started looking into the scientific literature of cannabidiol, and now he has focused his efforts on patient-based clinical research to evaluate the use of high-dose cannabidiol treatment for various medical conditions, including addiction, anxiety, autoimmune disease, cancer, pain, sleep disorders. And so with the success of his research, he co-founded the cannabinoid therapeutic company, Rebel MD, and their purpose is, their mission is developing pharmaceutical-grade treatment options for clinical endocannabinoid deficiency. So how's that for the introduction for this incredible man that we have with us today? Welcome, please, the amazing Dr. Christian Shaw.
Wow. Well, can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for that introduction. And I'm very honored to be speaking amongst all of these extremely accomplished and passionate guests. Thank you as well, Denise, for putting everything together. I guess at this point, I just need my presentation to pop up, or how do I do that?
Okay. Let me see. Hold on a second. You should be able to, at the bottom, there's a share screen button.
Okay.
And you see that it should be green.
Yeah.
And you should be able to just click on start sharing your screen. Worst case scenario.
I got you. Okay, so then I got to open up my...
There you go. Perfect. We're seeing your screen. So, yeah, hopefully there's nothing there that you don't want us to see.
Can you...
and just make it...
see how this looks for everyone else, so I don't know if...
All you need to do is just make it enlarge everything. Just fill your whole screen, and you're good to go.
So that's
you can drag it, expand that, and you're good to go.
I think What I probably have to do is open the PowerPoint because this is a PDF. So maybe it's not doing that. Let me see here. Just 1 moment.
Or just drag it wide open. Just drag it. Just grab a corner and drag it open.
Yeah. There. Okay.
Ah, there you go. Woohoo!
So
You got it. Thank you.
you have to try to.
If you need to, we can also, if you need to send it in, we can also try and do it from this end. Unfortunately, it's it's a little bit easier for you to control.
Okay.
Always a backup plan.
All right. So
Take it away.
I'm just trying to get used to having this little screen with the camera in a way that won't be so distracting with the presentation. Let's see. So what I'm going to talk about is give really an overview of the therapeutic potential of cannabidiol for opiate addiction treatment, and then move on to any questions that the audience may have. And what the intent really is to kind of give a summary and then review some relevant human-based research where we're at right now, finishing up with a study that I'm going to be publishing shortly. Fortunately, the editor of the journal was kind enough to let me access the first page so that I could share it. Okay, so starting off with, wow. So use of various psychoactive substances, it's been going on for quite a long time, as everyone's aware. And it's also quite common knowledge that repeated use of many drugs that kind of satisfy this criteria lead eventually to some degree of dependence, and that can lead to addiction. So addiction is really a state that can be defined by a recurrent compulsion to procure and use a drug, and a loss of control in limiting that drug use as the use continues despite ongoing and more serious negative consequences. Whether it might be you start with a normal kind of alcohol use, and over time it starts to develop into more of a dependency. And when you get to really the addiction aspect of it, it's like you've had a DUI, and if that's not enough, you continue, then you might have another DUI and you go to jail. Similarly with someone that might be using opiates, they may have an unintentional overdose and then they continue to use. So these are the kind of negative consequences that I'm referring to. And the result of that is when this drug itself is actually deprived from the individual, you have this emergence of a very negative emotional state. And that is kind of typified by withdrawal symptoms, both psychologically and physically. So the endocannabinoid system itself, as I think everyone's aware, is quite ancient and conserved system across species, involved in energy balance, modulation of the pain response, which involves processing central and peripheral pain signaling. It's also involved in learning, and memory, and rewards and emotion. And increasing evidence is really suggesting that the ECS is highly involved in the acquisition and maintenance of drug-taking behavior and the various kind of psychological and physiological processes that are associated with addiction. So I think everyone's aware of the opiate epidemic by now. This resulted, I believe, many reasons, but predominantly widespread access to prescribed medication and illicit narcotics contributed to this explosive epidemic that's really ravaged the United States and other countries. Some statistics from 99 to 2018, we have nearly 450,000 Americans that have died from opiate overdose. And the CDC reports since 2016 an average of about 130 deaths per day from opiate overdoses. I think that the evolution really came from this CDC figure is really nice because it's a good summary, and what I've seen over the years treating patients, that you really have this explosion in managing pain to the point that doctors were actually kind of handcuffed, that state boards would come after them if they weren't treating pain aggressively enough. So that kind of led to this over prescribing of opiates to the point it was just in some cases thrown out like candy. That then started to evolve for someone that would develop that kind of dependence into eventually being cut off by their prescribing doctor. And it usually would be easier and far less expensive to obtain heroin on the street, because even at the time, pills were harder to come by. Heroin was cheaper and more bang for your buck. So with that same tendency, we eventually got the emergence of these synthetics, fentanyl in particular. And this is kind of, heroin 2.0, so to speak, that it's 50 to 100 times more potent and the same cost. So people are starting to gravitate towards that. Fortunately, it's not overwhelming in terms of people that have opiate dependence, but because a lot of them are very knowledgeable of the fact that this can really just put you over quite quickly, because there's really no way to appreciate how much might be cut in with your existing heroin supply by your dealer. And as I tell patients, it's bad enough shooting up heroin, but when you're shooting up heroin these days, and more you're seeing it cut with fentanyl, you could have a fairly significant tolerance to opiates, but this could just push you over and it could be lights out. So growing evidence in research is suggesting there's actually a functional interaction between our endogenous cannabinoid and opiate systems. I like to include these two figures to just kind of show how widespread both these systems are, the ECS and the opiate-based system, on all these different physiological and psychological processes that they influence. And it's believed that an interplay between these systems is actually a major influencer of pain and mood regulation, as well as reward processing and developing addiction. So just to further expound on that, they've identified the CB1 receptor co-localized with the mu opioid receptor in many parts of the brain that are involved in the reward processes, and have shown in models, mostly rodent models, I believe, that they share these common signaling cascades. And so current research is really focusing on understanding endocannabinoid and opiate signaling, how it works within the mesolimbic dopaminergic system, which is just a technical way to say the reward pathway in the brain. Okay, so now I'm going to start going through actual research quickly, and I think it's important to do so because this kind of leads, this tells the story of where the interest started with respect to where we are now with how CBD was tested and has potential for opiate addiction treatment. So there were a lot of, I think, preliminary studies done a long time ago, maybe in the 80s, which found anxiolytic properties with CBD. But in this 2011 paper was where we first see a study in which these properties were investigated with patients with general anxiety disorder using functional neuroimaging. And relative to the placebo treatment, you had a significant decrease in subjectively reported anxiety. And they were able to show through the functional neuroimaging where these areas really were most active. And that would be in the limbic and paralimbic brain sections. Then this moved forward, and there was a review in neurotherapeutics in 2015, and this was really just kind of reviewing the potential for cannabidiol as treatment for addiction, with emphasis on opiate addiction. And they concluded that there's a lot of clinical investigations that argue strongly in favor of further kind of exploring CBD as a therapeutic intervention for opiate relapse. So then, moving forward in 2018, there's a very cool study done where they took poly drug users, and what they did was they compared various measures that would suggest low or high abuse potential when they would administer high doses of CBD versus Xanax or dronabinol, which is just purified THC. And what they found is that alprazolam, Xanax, not surprisingly, had the highest abuse potential, whereas dronabinol had some significant potential associated with it, whereas CBD, even at that dose, showed very low abuse potential, which I think is extremely helpful when you're trying to push this as a potential therapeutic for opioid addiction. Then the HERD study came out last year, and this kind of rocked things because one of the few times I've ever seen that research that's in a specific field becomes within, prior to it even being published, it was released and on CNN's health website front page. And actually one of my medical assistants came and showed me it because I hadn't even heard of it yet. And then I had to go read the paper. So it was quite remarkable how they did that. And so in this case, what they did was the gold standard double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial where they administered either 4 or 800 milligrams once daily of CBD for 3 consecutive days compared to the placebo group. And what they found was that in drug abstinent individuals, so these are people that had heroin use disorder but had not used in a certain amount of time, whether it was weeks or months. And what they would do is administer these doses, and then they would give them all kinds of cues to try to trigger the drug craving and other kind of psychological withdrawal symptoms. And what they found is that CBD at either dose compared to the placebo group had a significantly protective effect in reducing craving, anxiety, and other psychologically related triggers. And this kind of led forward. And so now we've come to the point where this paper that I put together, which is a case report of an individual patient, came in because I had heard anecdotal stories from patients that when they weren't able to come in and receive treatment where they would be taking their methadone on a daily basis, they might miss a couple days and not be able to access the clinic and go into some degree of withdrawal. They found that by using CBD, they were able to really mitigate the withdrawal symptoms. And kind of cumulatively from studying this field in a while, so I think that it makes a lot of sense that high dose CBD could be used to treat acute withdrawal symptoms, because as I go back to this previous study, this study by Hurd et al. Was really trying to show that cue-induced craving anxiety in those that were already abstinent, so post any withdrawal symptoms actively, but kind of things that could be re-triggered, was counteracted by cannabidiol. So I wanted to take it a step further to be relevant more for my clinical practice and others in addiction. What could we use CBD for, and would it be helpful to treat active withdrawal symptoms for opioid withdrawal? So I had a patient that was on his way out of methadone-based medication-assisted treatment for his opioid use disorder. He had an 8-year severe opioid use disorder. He came into the clinic, I believe, back in 2015, where he had reported a multi-year opiate use history, started with pills, evolved into snorting, and then finally IV heroin use. We started him, as all our patients, on a increasing titration of methadone to serve as opiate replacement therapy. The point of this being that you are kind of just substituting the opiate chemical for a much more safe and structured medication, so that this individual doesn't have to spend multiple times a day constantly trying to satisfy his withdrawal symptoms, which is kind of the cycle of addiction, especially opiate addiction. So once an individual gets stabilized on medication-assisted treatment, then they're able to kind of focus on the behavioral health interventions and such, so that they can really start figuring out how they can move forward to start to titrate off the medication, eventually be done with it. So this individual started on the medication and titrated up to a fairly significant dose. His heroin use started to diminish and then was gone. He stayed in sustained remission from his opiate use disorder for 2 years before he thought it was time to start titrating down from his methadone-based therapy. And when I saw him, this had already been another year post that, so he titrated down for about 3 years slowly. And then he was at a point where he's at 10 milligrams of methadone. And he talked to me and said, I really want to get off the methadone at this point. What can I expect? And I explained to him that you're going to have some withdrawal symptoms. And, the difference between a heroin-based withdrawal and a methadone-based withdrawal is that one is a very short-acting agonist, the other is long-acting. And so what happens with any kind of drug, if it's short-acting, the withdrawal symptoms are going to be much more intense, but a short period of time. Where if it's a long-acting medication, there tend to be less intense withdrawal symptoms, but for much longer time. So whereas heroin withdrawal might be 3 to 5 days, methadone withdrawal might last 2 weeks, or sometimes even more. So when I explained that to him, he was a bit more concerned. I said, and then I proposed to him that I wanted to do a case report using high-dose CBD to treat these acute withdrawal symptoms, for the point of transitioning to a medication called naltrexone, which is an opiate agonist instead, which is just an opiate blocker. And typically what happens is you need a 7-day washout period from the last time you take an opiate before you can start this medication, because if you don't, it'll throw you in a serious withdrawal. So it's just standard that if you're ever going to go on naltrexone-based therapy for opiate use disorder remission, then you're going to have to give it that 7 to 10 day washout period. And not surprisingly, during that 7 to 10 days is where you have a significant amount of relapse, because people they're not ready yet. And so they have, their first week off of any opiate replacement, and they tend to relapse. So we started the medication after he was in active withdrawal. We told him to wait 48 hours after his last dose of the 10 milligrams of methadone that he was taking daily. And he came into the clinic. The nursing staff performed various assessments, including the COW scale, which is a clinical opiate withdrawal scale. He was in active withdrawal on day one at 14, I believe, which is moderate withdrawal. Severe being extreme, where they're at the point that you might see more in some kind of Hollywood depiction of withdrawal, where they're just looking really bad, constantly in the bathroom, constantly throwing up, that kind of thing. So moderate withdrawal is pretty common for someone that's gone without an opiate, that has opiate use disorder for a couple of days. Then we started him on the sublingual treatment. By day, I believe, 2 of that treatment, his withdrawal symptoms already decreased down to 5, the cutoff really being 4 before there's no withdrawal. And then following up within a week, he was below any withdrawal recordable by the COWS assessment. And so this is significant, because he normally, an individual titrating off methadone and just stopping like that would probably have withdrawal symptoms for at least 10, but maybe over 14 days. He was done really by about day 2, but technically completely out of withdrawal by day 7. And I would argue that I think he probably was experiencing minimal, if any, withdrawal after day 3. So the exciting thing about this is it kind of lays the groundwork of what CBD can do for acute withdrawal symptoms. And it also shows a new pathway that addiction doctors can utilize when they want to start an individual on naltrexone and not have to be challenged with what are we going to do for 7 to 10 days. So I'm pretty excited about this publication and its impact. And with that, I think I'm just going to conclude and open up any questions that anyone in the audience may have.
Hi, Dr. Shaw. This is Tasha Jackson. There's a question from one of the attendees, and they are asking, would valerian root with CBD or by itself is recommended as a good option for opioid withdrawals?
Well, I think valerian root certainly has some properties. I'm doing some studies right now combining CBD and valerian, as well as some other compounds that have sedative properties more for to address insomnia. So yeah, I think that would be good. That would certainly be a good combination.
And then I don't see any other questions here. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I would like to thank him for his presentation.
Well, thank you.
Yes, just like I would like to thank Dr. Chevalier for his presentation. Both of you, I would really like to assist in sharing with you that I can uplift what you're doing to a great deal based on my understanding and 65 years of dealing with cleaning of the gut system, okay? Working with the connectivity with the entire endocrine system. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a certified person in the state of Pennsylvania, Department of Professional and Occupational Affairs. I understand the human body very much. I'm still learning. I've learned a lot today from both of you. I mean, you'd be surprised because it's what I deal with. I deal with the digestive system to assist any endocrinologist because it starts there. And if the digestive system is hampered, it's more challenging for especially you, Dr. Shaw, and also Dr. Chevalier. So my offering you is to see where we can meet in exchange with what I do so that you can assist me, assist you. Because that's what I speak about, that's what I live about. And I'm listening and I'm hearing a lot of similarities here that we can share. And I think this is what this whole platform is about, is for us to learn from each other so that we have more to offer to others. I see Dr. Rob just came on.
Yes,
hello.
Dr. Rob is coming on next. Dr. Shaw, we have one more question, and that has to do with nicotine withdrawal. Have you experienced with your patients any effects of cannabis with nicotine withdrawal?
So interestingly, when I was putting the presentation together, initially had some other uses that have been published for high dose cannabidiol, and one of them is nicotine cessation. There was only one study. I didn't include it in my presentation, but the short answer is yes, they had positive results. So I'd expect more to come from that. In fact, I'm going to be starting soon overseeing a drug and alcohol detox center in one of the studies that we're interested in doing is utilizing CBD and or hemp-based cigarettes to assess whether that will help with nicotine cessation. But there is certainly preliminary evidence that it would be very helpful.
Thank you. And there was a question, what other natural products would you recommend with CBD for this treatment? So that's a really loaded question. We do have an all hands on deck presentation at the end of all of the speakers' presentations this afternoon. That'll happen at 2:30. And the next presentation is also going to go into another natural product. It's a perfect segue, thank you, that does work with CBD. So Dr. Shaw, thank you so much for your time. And if anybody would like to get in contact with Dr. Shaw, how do they reach you?
Well, I think they can use, it is, let me see, info@rebelmd.com.
Perfect. And also, everybody can reach Dr. Shaw through cannaworldexpo.com. If you know anybody that's battling addiction, it's a real problem. We were not able to share some infographics with you, but over the course of maybe a decade, you can see opioid addiction spreading through this country, the United States, where we're broadcasting from, like a virus, coast to coast. And it is rampant in this country. And what we've learned today is that cannabis does positively affect this condition that people are battling. So thank you, Dr. Shaw.